Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to day two of the Living Dystopian International Conference here at the OUCIP Hyderabad. We begin day two proceedings with an online platform presentation session. The session is going to be chaired by Professor Hemraj Bansal from Central University of Himachal Pradesh, Dharamshala. There are five presenters. I see three of them on screen. There ought to be others joining shortly, I guess. So, Hemraj, it's over to you, and you can go by sequence. I think Madhuchanda and Rima, the first two speakers, are all here. So, it's up to you, Hemraj. You have read their abstracts as well. So, your introductory remarks, and then we proceed with the paper reading session. Over to you, Hemraj.
Okay, thank you, Devashish. So, a very good morning. A very good morning, everybody. Well, it gives me immense pleasure to be a part of this international conference taking place at Osmania University on the theme Living Dystopian, Post-Millennial Perceptions and Post-Pandemic Realities. So, in the very beginning, I express my deep sense of gratitude to Dr. Pradipta Mukherjee, the organizing secretary of this conference, and Dr. Debashish Lahiri, the convener, for giving me this opportunity to chair this session. I'm also thankful to Dr. Konda Nageshwar Rao, the director, Osmania University Center for International Programs, for all the support for the conference. Well, the theme is really interesting. It is topical, it is relevant, especially when we are reeling under the challenges which have been posed before us by corona pandemic. So let me say in the very beginning that this place Dharamshala is receiving heavy snowfall, not snowfall, it is rainfall, but at the same time it is also snowing on the mountains. So I'm afraid of the technical glitches or internet connectivity at my end, but I hope it continues to be normal. I just want to add here that during the lockdown last year, the hills in Dharmshala, they became
Facebook Live.
visible. They became visible from Jalandhar. Now, Jalandhar is a place actually which is nearly 190 kilometer away from Dharmshala. So when the hills they became visible from Jalandhar, so it was something which was unprecedented, as never before these Dhauladhar mountain ranges they had been sighted from such a far off place. Now it shows how we have brought actually this degradation to what? To the environment, and how the pollution level has made the lives horrible, and hence the resultant pandemics, right? So this is the time actually to take lessons. Why I start from this local place, that is from Dharamshala, and why did I talk about actually these mountain ranges here, right? These Dhauladhar mountain ranges. It is for this reason that those let us say 3 to 4 weeks of strict lockdown, they resulted in cleaning of the environment as such, right? But at the same time there also needs to be the cleaning of the minds as well. So, well, not taking much time, I just want to add in the beginning that since we have got five presentations, so each presenter will be given, I think, not more than 10 to 12 minutes time, so that we have got also ample time for question answers, right? So what I would say is, let us actually begin the day with our first paper presenter, Dr. Nivedita Invasi Sister Nivedita University in Kolkata, and she will be speaking on Call of the Wild, decoding the linguistic dystopia in the television series Zoo. So over to you, Dr. Madhuchanda Ray Chaudhary.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bansal. Um, I would be sharing screen because I have a few slides to show. So please bear with me and let me know whether the slides are visible or not. And I also, add the disclaimer at the very beginning. I'll try very hard to keep within time, but this is also a very truncated version of the original paper. So here I go. Right. So, Zoo is actually a television series that CBCS aired in 2015. So in 2015, CBCS launched the series called Zoo that caught the popular imagination. Adapted from James Patterson and Michael Ledwidge's 2012 novel of the same name, Zoo depicts a dystopian world where animals communicate, take over the earth, attack, and dominate over human beings. Apart from featuring various conventional elements of the dystopian genre, the most interesting aspect of the series is the root cause behind the mayhem that the animals unleash on the world. The animal kingdom succeed in attacking and taking over the human beings because of their ability to communicate across species and thereby create strategies to dominate over and eventually destroy humankind. This unique ability of the animals results from a genetic mutation in them. Ironically, this mutation is the unforeseen side effect of a chemical that a corporate giant discovers and infuses in its products in order to enhance the production rates of its wares. As this company's products range from pet food to pesticides, the nefarious chemical penetrates down the food chain, mutating animals across species. The animals therefore communicate to create a community, and this community launches a communal attack against humankind in order to avenge long sustained human exploitation of animals and the natural world. But the linguistic interspecies communication that enables the animals to create a dystopian community opens up a lens for analyzing this series in the light of Ferdinand de Saussure's theory about the arbitrary nature of the linguistic sign and the ability of language to create and transform reality. Thus, the series Zoo can't be interpreted simply as a conventional dystopian work that creates a nightmarish futuristic world in order to critique the flaws inherent in the present order. It must be studied by intersecting aspects of dystopian literature, science fiction, and the implications of Saussure's theory about language and its ability to build community, albeit a dystopian one in this case. So therefore, I start by very briefly and quickly outlining some of the key concepts that Saussure discusses in course in general linguistics. One, of course, is that language is not necessarily material, but the relationship, because the relationship between the signifier and the signified is arbitrary. To quote Saussure, the linguistic sign unites not a thing and a name, but a concept that is signified and a sound image that is signifier. The latter is not a material sound, a purely physical sound, but the psychological imprint of the sound, the impression that it makes on our senses, unquote. He further asserted that the link between the signifier and the signified is completely arbitrary. But despite being arbitrary, this relationship is determined by convention. And once again, I quote Saussure, because the sign is arbitrary, it follows no law other than that of tradition. And because it is based on tradition, it is arbitrary, unquote. Yet, language evolves, and this relationship between the signifier and the signified also changes. So once again, to go back to Saussure, quote, as language is the product of both social force and time, no one can change anything in it. On the other hand, the arbitrariness of its signs theoretically entails the freedom of establishing just any relationship between phonetic substance and ideas. The result is that language changes under the influence of all the forces which can affect either sounds or meaning, unquote. So the same sign can gradually acquire a different meaning over time, or the same signifier can denote a different signified. This concept of language by Saussure bears very significant ramifications. Firstly, it implies that language has a psychological basis. Secondly, that it implies that the world that we inhabit is a product of the language that we use. And Daniel Chandler very helpfully explains this concept. He says, to quote, the arbitrariness of the sign is a radical concept because it proposes the autonomy of language in relation to reality. The Saussurian model, with its emphasis on internal structure within a sign system, can be seen as a notion that language does not reflect reality, but rather constructs it. We can use language to say what isn't in the world as well as what is. And since we come to know the world through whatever language we have been born into the midst of, it is legitimate to argue that our language determines reality rather than reality our language. Unquote. Language, therefore, can build perceptions, create community, construct reality, and determine behavior. And therefore, now I go into what is the relationship between dystopia, Saussure, and this idea of community. So, analyzed from in the light of Saussure's theory, the series Zoo assumes a new significance, which opens a fresh lens for viewing the concept of dystopia. In Zoo, we find that the animal world has acquired the aspects of human language system. The humans are at a loss to understand how different species are being able to communicate with each other and thereby also strategize between themselves. But if we apply Saussure's theory about the shifting nature of the relationship between the signifier and the signified, the mystery resolves itself. If we regard the distinct calls of each species of animals as signifiers attached to a particular signified, then there is nothing to stop a lion's roar to indicate the same concept or signified as a wolf's howl or a dog's bark. In other words, Zoo demonstrates the result of linguistic evolution, albeit from a dark and dystopian angle. We can see a further influence of Saussure's theory when we see a change in the animal's behavioral patterns towards the human beings. In other words, various species of animals are not merely communicating between themselves, their view of the world and human beings have also changed. As Chloe, a character in the series, explains, the animals no longer regard human beings as the apex predators. This new Lang of the animal kingdom has psychological and therefore behavioral ramifications. Now, ironically, the imagination of this universe becomes plausible only because Saussure had divested the linguistic sign of materiality and had established it as a psychological entity, an entity which enables human beings to construct and transform the world linguistically. In case of Zoo, however, it's the animals which do so. Thus, Zoo imagines a dark fictional world conjuring up a terrifying future if we do not recognize and treat its symptoms in the here and the now. The distinctly dystopian angle emanates from the transformation of the idea of community. The word community is derived from the Latin communis. Communis comes, hang on, give me 1 second. Just lost the page here. Yeah, communis comes from the combination of the Latin prefix con, which means together, and the word munis, which means it has to do with performing services. Now, this etymological explanation obviously casts the word in a positive light. A community usually works together for the larger good. The animal community in Zoo provides an ironical twist to this implication. In the episode called Pack Mentality, a community of bats helped free a few caged birds, but the means that they assume is a nightmarish one. This particular incident occurs in a small house in Antarctica where a couple is spending their holiday. The power source there are the solar panels outside. A swarm of bats cover the solar panels, cutting off the power and thereby freezing the little house. Failing to understand this aberrant behavior by the bats, the couple initially tried to drive them away, but without success. Gradually, they realize that perhaps the bats are trying to free the caged birds in their house. The humans free the birds. The bats leave, but not before destroying the power source. As a result, the two humans freeze to death, while the birds and the bats run free. This incident puts a distinctly dystopian turn to the idea of community and communication. And so finally, very quickly, I go to the connection between dystopia and the science fiction element in Zoo. The creation of this dystopian world is linked to an element of science fiction. The unique aspect of Zoo lies in its element of science fiction, which imagines a chemical, which incidentally in the series is called the mother cell, which is capable of instituting this kind of linguistic mutation in the animal world. Ironically, though the linguistic sign is not material, the ramifications of its evolution are terrifyingly material in the series. The transformed linguistic ability of the animals enables them to physically and materially change the world around them. They indeed communicate to form communities, but these communities create anarchy, destruction, violence, and mayhem. Thus, linguistic evolution creates a dystopian universe. Ironically, the humans themselves inadvertently become the agents of this mutation in the animal kingdom. Thus, the positivist notion of human progress through massive scientific and technological innovation creates a nightmarish and dystopian world. By intersecting the implications of dystopian literature, science fiction, and sociolinguistic theory, my paper has thus tried to prove that the series Zoo warns us that we may very well be headed towards, if not indeed, be living in a dystopian universe. This analysis of the television series attempts to open up new lenses through which we can read dystopian literature, especially in the post-millennial world, a world that is yet to emerge from the throes of a pandemic. Long before the pandemic brutally exposed the limitations and vulnerabilities of human beings in the 21st century, an age when human civilization is supposed to be at the cutting edge of technology. The prescient television series Zoo had already predicted a dystopian universe where human beings would be overridden and rendered helpless by unprecedented mutations or evolutions in the natural world. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Manuchandra Chaudhary. Actually, you took so much care of the time that you actually finished your paper in just 11 minutes. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, it was a wonderful presentation. Let me compliment you in the first place. You beautifully explored how the ability to communicate as humans do, it decenters or I would say destabilizes that traditional notion of humans at the top rung of the theory of evolution. Now even when you go to this literature, even when you go to Alexander Pope, for example, we often find that famous line: the proper study of mankind is man, right? And why not actually the other species as such? So we have seen that humans, they have found themselves on the top rung of that what you call it, that civilization, right? And then you talked about language as an enabling mechanism, right? uh, but ironically, the world it creates, right, the world it creates is dystopian, right? Though language, as you talked about here, it serves as the a function of building a community, right? Animals threaten humans on the whole. So my question is that, do we want a dystopian world sans or without humans? I mean,
Okay,
what is your
right.
take on this?
Yeah,
Now,
right. Yes, sorry, go ahead, please, sir.
I hope if you got my question, then my question is, it's like that. We do have animal ethics as such in place, right? And then at the same time, we do find that although human beings, they have tried to exploit even animals, they have used them for their own use, or maybe they have abused them. But at the same time, putting the whole humanity under threat as such, right? So is it kind of world actually that we want?
Okay, thank you
Enabling
for
mechanism,
that. Yeah, right.
especially
Thank
with
you.
language.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you for that question, because, as I said, this is a very truncated paper, and I couldn't, concentrate on the entire show. So basically, the show is not really that the entire humanity is indicted, because there is a certain character in the show itself, Evanly Hartley, who we see is communicating with the animals because he is in kind of who is against this whole exploitation of the natural world. So one element that I couldn't bring in, of course, is the aspect of dystopian literature, which indicts the human society for its wrongs and therefore looks towards a possible reform, right? And that element is also certainly present in Zoo. So it's not saying that the animals should always take over the world. What it is doing is that it's showing that what can happen if the animals do take over the world. And if we humans here and now don't take note of what we are doing, our mistakes, then, you know, we are headed for doom. And incidentally, that also brings to another aspect of my paper, which I couldn't talk about here, is that usually the one aspect of dystopian literature is that it is set in a particular time, either the past or the future. Now, what is interesting in this case, in the series, is that it never tells us whether this is in the future. It kind of distinctly kind of gives us an impression that this could very well be the present. And incidentally, that is one aspect that a book called Utopia, Dystopia, Conditions of Historical Possibility talks about, which says that, you know, we need to take these ideas of utopia and dystopia beyond merely that of space and time. We need to look at them as concepts. So no, don't just lock them into one specific space, one specific time. And Zoo does exactly that. It does not lock it within a specific time of whether it's 2020, 2030 or 2040 or whatever. It doesn't say that, unlike, let's say, a 1984, for instance. Nor does it say that this is going to be specific to one community. It spreads, like the pandemic, it spreads across the world, this whole animal attack business.
Okay, thank you, Madhuchanda. I really liked actually even the examples that you provided, wherein you were talking about the bats actually, right? And then how bats they're trying to free the caged birds in the house. And then when you look at the humans, they free the birds, the bats leave. But in this what happens is that center of power that stands, I mean, destroyed, right? But as a result of it, you also talked about how, for example, these two humans, they are frozen to death, right? So while the birds actually and the bats, they run free, right? So it was really wonderful the way you try to show that how through this incident perfectly, I would say, or distinctly, a sort of dystopian turn to the idea of this community, and then communication it was built, right? But then at the same time, it's like that we cannot be, or even animals cannot be indiscriminate, right? And we cannot be vindictive actually, I mean, all the time, right? So thank you very much. I really appreciate your presentation. Over to other people if there are any questions. Maybe Devashish. If there is any, or if not, then we can go for the next question.
Yeah, thank you, Hemraj. The question that I had for Madhuchanda was firstly that where do you rank semiotic dystopia? Because that's what you were talking about, the contestation of meaning. Because you brought in Saussure, and the central problem over there, of course, is that of consensus versus dissensus. Language is a structure that premises these things, because human language is about consensus, agreeing to a code. Something messing up that code in the future, as you said, all kinds of mutations and other things happening. It hits at the very fabric, at the very root of human understanding and human civilization. So this kind of decimation, kind of future past kind of thing, this kind of decimation is total annulment. I mean, you can talk about toppling buildings and nature going wild and all that sort of thing, and pandemics and other things. But this is something that is nothing to be seen on the surface, but then everything else is happening in total disconcerting reality. So that is one question I had. How far where do you rate this kind of semiotic dystopia in the context of other dystopian literature and artworks? And secondly, the fact is that you also talked about the possibility of change. because change has been seen as positive and negative, as you can understand. Uh, there has been also a tendency to, especially in dystopian studies, to see things either as things happened in the past or in the future, deflecting these so-called dangerous and decimatory events into either the future or the past. Right. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You
So
are,
the
you are
thing
saying.
is that that's what I was asking. This tendency of deflecting everything to either the past or the future. What if the greatest dystopia of them all is to realize that something that you mentioned, uh, that everything is happening in time, in the present. That the greatest dystopia. And now Pradipta has a question. You can take all the questions together and answer it, Madhuchanda.
Hi, Madhuchanda.
Right.
Hello. Hi, Himraj. Actually, Madhuchanda, I really liked your presentation. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. But what I was wondering is, because I have also myself watched this television mini-series called Zoo. Okay, I have watched it on a regular basis. Madhuchanda, I felt that these kinds of television mini-series are basically made or created to provide sheer entertainment. Even when I need 100% entertainment, I go and watch these kinds of movies on Netflix. It's available on Netflix. Now, what I wanted to ask you, you being such a good academician, I wanted to ask you whether we can go beyond a linguistic model. You talked about Saussure, semiotic, signifier, signifies, and everything. Can we go beyond the linguistic model to interpret and read this particular television miniseries called Zoo? This is my first question. And secondly, how interesting is the treatment of the mesoscene in this film, in this particular miniseries? Because see, if this miniseries would have been directed by, say, a master director like Alfred Hitchcock, who
Yeah.
directed The Birds, Daphne du Maurier's Birds. You have birds attacking humans in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. Take a more contemporary example. If you take a director like Steven Spielberg and think of Jurassic Park, or think of the movie called Jaws, where you again have dinosaurs or sharks attacking humans. My question is, those films, whether it is Alfred Hitchcock's Birds or whether it is Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park or Jaws, they have a very interesting handling of the mesoscene. Each and every sequence can be read in depth and in detail. But when I watched Zoo, I was a bit frustrated because none of the sequences could be read critically. They were providing me sheer entertainment. They gave me that horror feeling which I wanted to have. But when you go, if you want to go deeper into the movie, then I did not find any one sequence in this television miniseries Zoo which is readable and which can be critically interpreted. So since you brought in linguistic theory and you talked about Saussure, which I think which can be done to any other movie, not just Zoo, can we go beyond this linguistic model and interpret this television mini series through another theoretical angle? This is my first question. And did you find the mesoscene handling of character, camera angles, like the way we have it in Alfred Hitchcock or Steven Spielberg? Uh, could you read any one sequence from Zoo which handles the mesoscene in such an interesting manner and contributes to the dystopian discourse of the movie? This is my second question to you, Madhuchanda.
Okay. My God, I have so many questions. I don't know where to start. Okay. I think I'll take Prodipta these first because I'll come to yours a little later. Prodipta,
For sure,
let me
please.
just acknowledge, yeah, let me just acknowledge at the outset that I'm no film critic and you are. So let me just acknowledge my inability there. First and
That's
foremost, yes,
absolutely
I do
fine.
understand.
Huh? That's
Yeah. Yeah. First and foremost, at the outset clarify one thing, that I also found Zoo, as it went from season 1 to season 2, increasingly frustrating in terms of the way it was developing. I was expecting it to get better. It was getting worse. So yeah, that's true. I agree with you. And that also happened because there is no one single directorial vision or one single writer. Because when I was researching this, I found that each episode is directed and written by a different person. And
Different
also, when I was
person.
reading the book is distinctly different from the show. I mean, the premise is same, but or rather similar, quite similar, but it's not exactly the same. So I think that is one of the problems with a show like Zoo. And yes, it does play into that whole popular entertainment culture, which just wants thrills and chills. But to answer your question as to whether we want to read it now, what we can do is we can also read it in the context of popular literature, because incidentally, for instance, Gothic literature, I mean, at one point it was considered just rubbish, right? It was considered pop literature, and you just read it and throw it into the trash. That's what it was considered. But now we certainly do have a whole academic discipline about Gothic. So in that sense, I think we can certainly read Zoo and the implications of Zoo in terms of popular literature and placing it in that category and understanding it in that category. In terms of camera angles, honestly, Pradipati, I'm not qualified enough to analyze it that well, so I would not have that. Can you just explain that a little bit? Because honestly, I'm not a.
It's okay.
Yeah. And sir, sorry, what was your? Can I go back to your question? You said something about.
First of all, I asked you about semiotic dystopia. Where do you rank it in
Yeah.
the scheme of dystopias, if I could put it that way?
Oh,
There are many dystopias,
where do I
religious and
rank it?
political, and many kinds of dystopias. Where would you rank it? Number one. Secondly, what I asked was this tendency of putting everything into the bracket of the past and the future. All these dystopian visions and possibilities and projections. What if, I asked the question, what if we suddenly realize that everything that is dystopian, everything is happening in real time is now. There is no other place to deflect it to. In fact, which is
Exactly.
there. Whenever we construct a dystopia, it basically means we have already built a perspective, a sense of dealing with it. At least intellectually, we have already distanced it to some level in the future or in the past so that we can deal with it intellectually. But when things are happening all around, when the scope even for thinking has gone, that space has been taken away from you. What if that is the greatest in the light of Zoo and in the light of
Yeah, right. So I think that is what that book was talking about, which was obviously a book that was analyzing historical events, which can be read simultaneously as utopian / dystopian. So it was kind of breaking this binary between utopia and dystopia. This book by Michael Gordon, Gan Prakash, and Helen Tilley. So in that sense, it's talking about this idea that we can't restrict it, and because we can't restrict it into a space and a time, it is terrifying and it will be terrifying. But the point is that we need to recognize the terror of it. So I think that is where we see it. That is how I see a thing like Zoo coming in, and that is how I see how we can look at dystopia, not just because there is no room to deflect, and especially in the context of the pandemic that we are living in, there is no room to deflect, which makes dystopian literature all the more terrifying. If you can't deflect it, it will be terrifying, and that's what we are dealing with here. And in terms of ranking it, I don't know whether I will rank it or not, but I can certainly see that it opens up an interesting lens, which I'm sure if I don't know if we can further dig into it or not. I'm not sure if I can rank it in that sense, sir. But I can see that it's a different lens that I'm looking at it from.
So well,
Right,
thank you. Well, Devashish, you want to continue? I think I think we need to. Yeah, we need to take care of the time as
for that presentation.
Yes, Pradipta ma'am, you want to say something?
I have already asked her questions, so I think I'm not in a position to ask any more questions right now, because time will not
No,
permit.
I'm not-
Otherwise,
I'm
I
not
would have
asking
asked
more questions.
Madhuchanda.
Yeah, it is not permitting.
Absolutely okay. I just wanted to know my first question that
So-
whether we can go beyond in order to interpret this movie.
That was one
Whether we
question
can
I
go
asked.
beyond, sorry?
Go
Sorry,
beyond this
whether we can
linguistic
go-
model of semiotics and interpret
Yes,
this
as I
movie.
said. Yeah, I think we can interpret it in terms of popular culture. That's what I
Popular
was trying to
culture.
say. Popular culture and popular entertainment, and where it is headed and what it means. That's what I was wondering whether we could do it that way.
So well, with that, I think let us conclude this first presentation. So well, it generated a lot of discussion, your paper as such, and thank you so much, Devashish and Pradipta, for adding so much critical insights to the paper as such, and thank you so much, Madhuchandra Ray Chaudhary, for this presentation, which was really, I would say, an eye opener, and at the same time, it did provide so many insights into as to how to get ourselves sensitized over what to do and how to carry ourselves. So, well, let us go to the second paper presenter now. And the second paper presenter is Dr. Rima Chakrabarti, and she's assistant professor in the Department of English, Venturas College. And she's going to speak on this on the a topic: will the world ever take off its mask again? A reading in relation to postmodern cinema. So over to Dr. Rima Chakrabarti now.
Good morning. Am I audible? Am I audible, sir? Good morning. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible. Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank you all, and good morning to everyone here. And I'd like to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to speak my views. And it has been a wonderful session since yesterday, and it is really a privilege to speak and be a part of this amazing webinar. So, as you just said, as Dr. Bansal just said, the title of my paper is "Will the World Ever Take Off Its Mask Again? A Reading in Relation to Postmodern Cinema." What is in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. The purpose of a name is to assign an identity to an individual, which can yet again be altered by the use of masks. A mask is capable of obscuring an individual's identity and thereby conferring the power of anonymity. It can therefore be used for doing both good and evil. In the present situation of the pandemic, the use of mask has become a mandatory to keep oneself safe and also to prevent the spread of the disease. The COVID-19 situation has imposed solitude and alienation on the global population in the name of social distancing. The way people's attitude worldwide gradually changed from confusion to helplessness to desperation to despair and finally to hope as the pandemic spread like a wildfire and claimed thousands of lives makes for an interesting study. This paper intends to examine how masks, whether voluntary or involuntary, can instigate fear, instill mystery, or bestow hope by taking into account two cinematic representations, namely V for Vendetta and Batman Begins. Interestingly, in V for Vendetta, the protagonist is compelled to put on a mask. On the other hand, in Batman Begins, the wearing of a mask is voluntary. Such an analysis in the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic is certainly relevant. The mask can be seen as a signifier of shame upon the face of human civilization, as well as a visage to conceal ugly reality, as in V of V for Vendetta. To begin with this 2006 release, it was adopted from the 1988 DC Limited series of the same name by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. The film was directed by James McTeigue and written by the Wachowski brothers. As the plot unveils, we find that the world is in turmoil, with the United States fractured as a result of a second civil war and a pandemic of St. Mary's virus ravaging Europe. Taking advantage of the situation, the United Kingdom is ruled by the neo-fascist North Fire Party, helmed by the all-powerful High Chancellor Adam Sattler. Political opponents, immigrants, Jews, Muslims, atheists, homosexuals, and other undesirables are imprisoned and executed. It is against such a backdrop that we find the film chronicles the efforts of a masked protagonist V and his sidekick Evie to incite civil unrest and to overthrow the oppressive and fascist government. On November 4th, wearing a Guy Fawkes mask, V rescues Evie Hammond, an employee of state-run British television network, from the members of Fingerman Secret Police. They watch the demolition of the Old Bailey, accompanied by the fireworks and the 1812 overture. Later, V hijacks a BTN broadcast to claim responsibility for the destruction, encouraging the people of Britain to rebel against their government and meet him on the next year's Guy Fawkes Night outside the Houses of Parliament. It is now important to understand the significance of the Guy Fawkes mask in this regard, and I would like to quote a nursery rhyme, which is very common. Remember, remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. I know of no reason why gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. About 4 centuries ago, a group of radical Catholic dissidents attempted to assassinate James Stuart, the Scottish king who had recently taken the English crown following the death of Elizabeth I. The conspirators planned to detonate huge quantity of gunpowder beneath the Palace of Westminster during the opening session of Parliament in 1605. Had it succeeded, the gunpowder plot would have killed not only the king, but also the assembled Lords and Commons. Of course, the plot was foiled, and the king and the parliament were saved, and the kingdom of England and Scotland were eventually united. Now, while the historical Fawkes would have been a familiar figure to the British readers of the original V for Vendetta comic, thanks to the annual commemorations of the gunpowder plot on Bonfire Night on the 5th of November, the figure arguably had little or no significance for the global audience of the film, which premiered in 2006. The filmmakers solved this problem by adding a prologue that recapitulates Fawkes' role in the gunpowder plot. Set aside from the rest of the movie through its sepia-toned coloring, Evie provides a useful pocket historiography for the audience. And I quote, "I know his name was Guy Fawkes, and I know in 1605 he attempted to blow the Houses of Parliament." Her voice assures us that one's cultural inability to remember exactly what is celebrated on the 5th of November is not an insurmountable political obstacle in understanding these intentions. We are told to remember the idea and not the man, because a man can fail, he can be caught, he can be killed and forgotten, but 400 years later, an idea can still change the world. V's wearing of Guy Fawkes' mask certainly serves semiotic purposes, but the film makes it clear that the mask is also a practical necessity for him. We are informed in the course of the movie that V is the result of human experimentation in a bioweapons program in Larkhill, as a result of which his entire body has been mutilated. This is the primary reason of his wearing the Guy Fawkes mask. In the hands of McTague and the Wachowskis, however, the face of Fawkes is realized in its full potential. It becomes a nomadic, perpetually mutating postmodern symbol. To state the problem in structuralist terms, V is a free-floating signifier, the kind which refuses to become permanently attached to any signifier. This is especially interesting since in the classical structuralist model, the linguistic sign was meant to be arbitrary, but the visual symbol was not. Saussure insisted that with a symbol, there is a rudiment of natural bond between the signifier and signified. V for Vendetta contains a powerful post-structuralist argument that a symbol can be just as slippery as the sign. V's choice of the Guy Fawkes mask to hide his identity is very clever, because by 1981, the face of Fawkes had almost 4 centuries of shifting significations behind it. Writer Alan Moore and artist David Lloyd recognized that a symbol can actually become so freighted with multiple meanings that in the end it collapses under its own weight and escapes meaning altogether. In other words, the mask is a wonderful example of what post-structuralists call the free-floating signifier. It signifies because language cannot help but signify, but it never signifies the same thing twice. It is therefore the most dangerous of signifiers, or from an anarchist's point of view, the most interesting. The film has striking resemblance to the COVID-19 situation we are facing today. The fictional dystopic world which V for Vendetta depicted in 2006 is unfortunately our reality. The film referred to a virus causing a pandemic and also to the political unrest throughout the world. Today, as we live to see, we may notice that in the present situation, the interests of multiple governments are at stake. We cannot turn a blind eye to the worldwide blame game at play, leading to uncountable cases of racial discrimination. The issues reported across the planet are so alarming that on May 8, 2020, the United Nations Secretary said that, and I quote, "The pandemic continues to unleash a tsunami of hate and xenophobia, scapegoating and scaremongering." He also urged governments to act now to strengthen the immunities of our societies against the virus of hate. In the comic book, V in an instance names Anarchy his mistress and claims that, and I quote, "She has taught me that justice is meaningless without freedom." Of course, he understands anarchy in terms of resistance to the fascist power, which is afraid of any difference and intends to cultivate homogeneity in the name of normalcy. Coming to the present pandemic crisis, the numerous cases of violence against the chosen section of world population makes it clear for all to understand that this section is being targeted by the hegemonic forces worldwide as a recipient of the blame for the spread of the coronavirus. To quote a few examples, the headline of Washington Post of March 20, 2020 read, and I quote, "Trump has no qualms about calling coronavirus the Chinese virus. This is a dangerous attitude, experts say." And then there is a detailed analysis of how such a nomenclature of the virus might spread hate waves within the nation and also worldwide. Again, the governor of Veneto region of Italy, an early epicenter of the pandemic, told the journalists in February 2020 that the country would have been better than China in handling the virus due to the Italians' culturally strong attention to hygiene, washing hands, taking showers, whereas we have all seen the Chinese eating mice alive. He later apologized. Brazil's education minister ridiculed Chinese people in a tweet, suggesting that this pandemic was part of the Chinese government's plan for world domination. Increases in racist rhetoric have coincided with increases in racist attacks. Since February, Asians and people of Asian descent around the world have been subjected to attacks and beatings, violent bullying, threats, racist abuses, and discrimination that appear linked to the pandemic. Human rights and other groups in Italy, France, Australia, Russia have reported COVID-19 related attacks and harassment of people of Asian descent. Keeping such highly disturbing instances in view, I believe we will all agree that this is high time that the global population, instead of believing in the spoon-fed perception of homogeneity, begins to acknowledge the heterogeneity persisting in the world, which actually makes it such a beautiful place to live in. We wanted the entire British population to wear the Guy Fawkes mask and rise against the fascist government together. Ironic it may seem that today we too wear masks, just as we wanted the believers of his ideology to do. Time, I feel, has come to refuse to be guided or influenced by perspectivism of any form whatsoever and welcome the anarchy, which we explains means, and I quote, a state without leaders and not without order. With anarchy comes an age of true order, which is to say voluntary order. As it is only then the world population can collectively fight against the virus and also against any hegemonic force which spreads hatred and discrimination with vicious and self-aggrandizing intentions. If V's wearing of the mask in V for Vendetta was out of compulsion, Bruce Wayne's wearing of the cowl in Batman Begins is voluntary. To trace the origin of the Dark Knight, he first saw the light of the day on in the 27th issue of DC Comics, published in March 30, 1939. Today, Batman is a household name, and his 82 years of spotlight stands as a testament to his staying power. Batman's mask and symbol and the contour of his cloaked figure are universally recognized designs. Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, released in 2005, takes us to the dark corners of the life of billionaire Bruce Wayne, who is rescued from the anonymous Asian prison by the mysterious Henry Deckard. Bruce, who has been haunted by the memory of seeing his parents gunned down in front of him, has been wandering the world, picking fights with small-time thugs until Deckard finds him and offers an alternative to his nomadic existence. Deckard wants to train Bruce so that he can become a member of the League of Shadows, the organization presided over by Ra's al Ghul. The League of Shadows is dedicated to restoring balance to a world in which criminals thrive on the indulgence of society's understanding. Bruce's training under Deckard is physically demanding, but it transforms the young man into a living weapon. In the end, Bruce breaks with the League of Shadows so that he can return to his native Gotham City and fight the crime there. Aided by his faithful butler Alfred, the genius inventor Lucius Fox, one of city's few good cops Jim Gordon, and a childhood friend turned assistant DA Rochelle Dawes, Bruce sets out to bring justice to Gotham. He decides to do this not as Bruce Wayne, but as his sinister alter ego, the Batman. Just before assuming the identity of a vigilante, in the film, Bruce Wayne, in a conversation with Alfred... Sir, is there a problem?
Ma'am, we need to, we need to conclude, I think, in 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay, sir, sure.
We are running short of time. Yeah.
Okay. Bruce Wayne, in a conversation with Alfred Pennyworth, asserts, and I quote, "People need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy, and I cannot do that as Bruce Wayne. As a man, I am flesh and blood. I can be ignored. I can be destroyed. But as a symbol, I can be incorruptible. I can be everlasting. Indeed, the central element of the Batman's strategical intimidation is his mask. It is this mask which actually makes him a figure who is beyond the human perceptions, and therefore his enemies perhaps have an idea that he is the one who cannot be defeated, because of his animal appropriations, because of his wearing of the mask. He appears more like a bat than a person. Having said so, it is also to be remembered that Batman is not granted superpowers like the other, Marvel or the DC characters like Wonder Woman or the Flash, who can have, or even the Superman, who have powers which have an explanation, like Wonder Woman from a mythical deity, or the Superman like from an alien physiology. So Batman has qualities. He doesn't have superpower at all. Though he kind of, his visage or his mask is actually his superpower, which kind of makes him a person who is more relatable to the audience. And today, in the present pandemic situation, and his powers, or his attempt or his intentions to do good to the society comes from his loss of parents, which he had experienced right from in his early days. So now the pain of losing near and dear ones is very prominent in today's pandemic scenario, which connects all of us to Batman or to Bruce Wayne, in which thousands of lives have been lost. The sense of insecurity and uncertainty is raging across the globe as people have been confined to their homes, and businesses and educational institutions shut down in an attempt to contain the virus. In the wake of such unprecedented scenario, the survivors can certainly relate themselves to young Bruce, who was left to face life's challenges all alone. But then Bruce's assuming of the Batman identity is also relatable to the frontline COVID warriors, whose PPE kits are very similar to the Bat costume, as the purpose of both are to light a ray of hope in mankind. Every day, the selfless warriors, including the doctors, nurses, policemen, security guards, and thousands of others across the globe, are trying in as many ways as they can to help mankind sustain itself. Many of them have even cut themselves off from their families and their loved ones. The sacrifices that they are making for the safety and welfare of humanity is priceless and deserves lifelong gratitude on our end. Though it is not possible to name all such unsung heroes within the limited scope of this paper, I would like to take this opportunity to name Dr. Jean Jacques from France, Dr. Shatrughan Panchwani from India, Dr. Roberto Stella from Italy, Dr. Usma Riaz from Pakistan, Dr. Adil El Tewar from UK, Dr. Shireen Rouhani from Iran, among others, who have all sacrificed their lives while helping their patients fight the deadly virus. I would now conclude, having come to the end of the analysis of masks taught by the two heroes, or shall I say anti-heroes, of the DC graphic novel series, it comes out clear that masks, whether voluntary or involuntary, have the potential of uniting people and giving them hope for a better tomorrow. There is no doubt that the world, after wearing the mask for so long, can never return to what it once was. But this very recognition of the fact, I believe, can help the global population to use the mask in its full potential in the pandemic situation and even beyond it. The mask, as we wear to protect ourselves from the COVID-19 virus, can surely bring the entire human race together, just as the way we wanted things to happen. And like Batman, we can conjointly resist not only the biological, but also the socio-political evils persisting in the world. Though I might sound a bit romantic, yet drawing hope from the mask I wear, I would like to conclude my paper by quoting Staker Pentecost from Pacific Rim, and I quote, "At the edge of our hope, at the end of our time, we have chosen not only to believe in ourselves, but in each other. Today, there is not a man nor woman in here that shall stand alone. Not today. Today, we face the monsters that are at our door and bring the fight to them. Today, we are canceling the apocalypse." Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. So, in fact, when we refer to mask as such, we go back to the times of Shakespeare, as it was also during his time that the plague hit England, and when the playhouses were shut for 2 years, he resorted to writing his long poems like Rape of Lucrece and Venus and Adonis. So Dr. Chakravarti, in her paper, she attempted to show the mask as both a defense mechanism against the corona pandemic and also as a tool of empowerment. She also showed how a feeling of alienation was created through both the voluntary and involuntary use of mask as such. So at the same time, if we look at this movie particularly, this V for Vedanta. And so you find this year 2020 as such, and how this virus, it runs wild in the world, and most Americans, they find themselves dead. And then how Britain is ruled by a fascist dictator who promises, let us say, security, but not freedom, right? Not freedom. Now, when we stands against him, right? So he moves through these streets of London like a wraith, despite the desperate efforts, I would say, of the police. Now, see what had been taught in the schools, right? If we go back to that gunpowder plot, right? It was actually what had been done was that this House of Parliament, it was tried to be blown off, right? And then British school children for centuries, they were taught to actually start these bonfires to burn fox in effigy. Now, what interestingly, what do we find here is, as you also pointed out, right, that when we talk about 2020, we now he saves a young TV reporter, right, and from being raped at the hands of the police, and eventually you become a hero. So you trace that journey actually as to how one was a villain, I mean, there in this gunpowder plot, and now how one turns a hero. And then you beautifully try to actually conclude it by saying that as to how that if we become united, then we can actually overcome this corona pandemic as such. So I really liked your presentation, because you brought
Thank
in
you, sir.
you also brought in, you brought in so much, so right. uh, just a small query, a short query, that when we are looking at corona pandemic as such, and then when we are celebrating our heroes as such, right? As we took the example of V for Vedanta, and then wearing of that mask of Guy Fawkes, right?
Yeah.
How do we look at this for example, a blame game that you were referring to, right? Blame game, for example, the Chinese being at the target, or then Tablighi Jamaat at the target, when that they held that sort of what you would call it, a religious gathering, a congregation there in Delhi. So can a particular chunk of population, or can a particular country be blamed like this?
Thank you for the question, sir. Actually, this is what I wanted to, point out, that this is what things are happening right now. And, we are fed into that perspectivism. This was a very limited time, and this paper was just a short version of what I actually had. So when we talk about, if we see Nietzsche's understanding of perspectivism, we see that the truth actually doesn't, truth is something which is created and which is kind of constructed out of various perspectives. So, this is the perspectivism which the world population is fed right now. And this is what we are feeding it. And the very realization, and we are doing all of that without realizing that this is how we are, that is the irony of the situation, that the entire world population is told, or rather they are fed fed with such perspectives, that they are not realizing that they are actually doing racial discrimination against others. They are doing it with a sense of conviction that what they are doing is right. So I think that this is high time that we open our eyes to this fact that, see, these hegemonic powers are actually making you blind towards your fellow people. You are trying to bring in, this is very similar to the fascist forces in the V for Vendetta, movie, where, they were trying to build in a kind of a homogeneity. Therefore, all the Muslims, all the, the people who are lesbians and gay people, they were being killed and executed. Why? Because they were trying to build in a kind of a homogeneity. So this is exactly what a few governments or a few hegemonic powers worldwide are trying to do. They are trying to blame the entire thing on the Chinese population and people who look like them. So you don't even need to be a Chinese to have that blame on you. So that is something which is happening, and this is high time that we open our eyes to that. Even at one point, I remember that even Indians were blaming the Chinese. I mean, this is exactly what these hegemonic powers actually wanted from us. So this is something which we have to be aware of, and this is something which we need to open our eyes to. And that is what we was also trying to do in the film. So that is how I was trying to relate what we was doing, and how V for Vendetta is our reality. and what therefore we have to be more and more conscious about the fact. So that is what I was trying to refer to in my paper.
Well. Thank you very much, Rima Chakravarti, and thank you for that statement. An idea can change the world, and that is how that idea is actually very well used in the movie that you were talking about. So thank you very much for your presentation. I think we don't have much time, and then if we have one more question we can take, but I don't think we are left with much time. So you are not audible with this.
Hello.
Yes, you are
Do
not
I
audible.
have time to ask one question to Rima? Just one question.
Sorry.
I'm asking, do I have the time to just ask one question to Rima?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Okay. Rima, thank you for your presentation. Now, you talked about V for Vendetta, this particular movie, which we have all seen. Most of us have seen this movie. A lot of media hype was generated when this movie was released, and a lot of internet articles are also available regarding, a lot of discussion is happening on this particular movie, V for Vendetta. Now, when I watched this movie, okay, my first impression was it is a highly stylized representation of, violence and graphic violence, whatever way you would like to put it. And this graphic violence that is there in the movie, it is also, combined with a kind of visually stunning, kind of miso-scene. Now, what I'm
Yeah.
trying to ask you is, because of this spectacular grandeur of the visuals in the movie, which we are all taken aback by, okay, and you did talk about visuals. It is not something out of context. I'm asking you. You did
No,
mention
definitely.
visuals,
Yeah.
but you did not. You didn't have the time to go into the details. Now, since you mentioned visuals, and visuals are so very interestingly handled in this movie, I would want to know how these visual motives in V for Vendetta contribute to symbol making, which is again one argument of your paper, and
Yeah.
also contribute to image making. And in the larger scenario, how does it contribute to the idea of this loss of identity and freedom in a totalitarian futuristic Britain? So, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very interesting question, and you know what? This question makes me, I was feeling of talking about this as well in my paper, but as we all know, that time is restrained. So, thank you very much for this question. Actually, you see, when I was talking or doing my research on this movie, I saw that this movie has been highly criticized, by lots of critics and lots of movie reviewers, by saying that okay, what they are trying to do is that they are trying to make a popular movie and trying to gain money out of it, and therefore all the violence and all those things which would probably draw the audience towards the movie. So the purpose of the movie is not to spread any kind of any revolutionary zeal, anything. People are just trying to make this movie and kind of earn as much as money as possible. So that is true. The representation of violence and all of that, the purpose of that partially might be, and I would like to mention here one more thing, that after the movie release, that mask, that gained so much popularity, and the selling of the masks became so common, and large scale productions of the mask were made. And yes, there is a commercial angle to this movie as well, because at the end of the day, this is a commercial movie. So we have to take into mind while we talk about or while we analyze this movie. But what I found interesting in this case is that this movie suddenly grew very relevant to our present situation. What V for Vendetta was doing out of probably to gain a commercial foothold is actually the reality that we are living in. So yes, that is the fact that maybe there are lots of commercial elements to it. Maybe there is there are things which which were done with the purpose of drawing in more and more audience to the theaters. Yes, but at the same time, I think this is the reality which we are living today. So that is what makes the movie so much of a relevant and so much contemporary. Therefore, that is why I took up this this movie to talk about. And yes, the masks actually is basically, this Guy Fawkes mask has a very interesting history behind it, and even the name Guy, the Guy Fawkes, this is just another guy for us. We use the word guy without even realizing that its origin was back in the gunpowder plot, and he was not a hero but a villain. So this is how the identity have had a shifting signification throughout the history, and there have been lots of other groups as well, like the hacktivist group called Anonymous, and there were other groups as well who had used this mask immediately after the release of this movie, to kind of take ahead their vested interests and their agendas, you see. So yeah, this movie has had a symbolic signification, so definitely. And apart from the commercial aspect, which is there, which cannot be ignored, and this movie was not done with a with a socialist view or agenda in mind. It was absolutely a commercial movie made with commercial perspectives, and therefore it had things which had commercial interests in mind. But what makes this
Rima, can I
most-
just interrupt you for a moment? Can I
Yeah.
just interrupt you for a moment?
Yes.
Just hold on 1 second, okay? We'll come back on screen. Just hold on.
Okay, sure.
Uh, Rima, I just wanted to add one comment that since you mentioned this movie has a commercial angle to it, I just wanted to add all movies are made keeping that commercial angle in mind. None of the movies are free of any commercial angle. All movies have
Yeah, but
commercial
then,
angle.
yes, but then there are certain movies, the producers or the directors, they claim at least that we do not have any commercial intentions. There are some movies where the directors come ahead and say that, no, we do not have any commercial, at least whatever the reality may be, they claim. But here, that claim was also not made. People were doing it with commercial and vested interests in mind, but that makes it relevant in the present situation. And therefore, I picked up this movie, irrespective of its, commercial angles and other things, as you just
Thank
mentioned.
you. I think the chairperson
Okay.
has something to tell you. Okay.
Okay, ma'am. Now
Yes,
we have one more question. We have one more question from Devashish.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rima. Very interesting paper that you presented today. You talked about the Guy Fawkes mask a lot during your presentation. Did you realize the fact that that grin, that leer on the face of that mask is actually something as old as the Punic mask that we talk about, the death mask from Carthage, the Punic mask?
True.
Of course, if you study tragedy, you know the Punic death mask. So
Yeah,
it's a
true.
kind of a leer, it's kind of a Giacometti kind of a smile, a grin extended into a grimace, almost.
True.
Now, you related in a rather easy way the Guy Fawkes mask or Batman's mask that he donned in the DC comics to the pandemic-induced masks that we are wearing these days. Do you? I think that it is a bit too over the top, the connection, because you see, this is a necessity, and it doesn't cover our face. I mean, people are fully aware of who we are. I mean, even when we wear the mask, we are doing it to save ourselves and our immediate surroundings, our friends and our loved ones. So that is one. So the mask, rather than that, the masquerade, if I could couple it that way. I mean, what these characters in those films, stylized comics, and then of course made into films, they do, and what we are doing now. I mean, that is a masquerade. This is a necessity, a matter of life and death. The second thing is that you seem to be using the mask as a shorthand for dystopia. I mean, artists use shorthands. So you seem to, in your paper, to be talking about a mask as a shorthand for dystopia, for a kind of a bad time. You talked about the PPE suit having some similarities with Batman's entire suit or something like that. And then, of course, when you talked about V for Vendetta, you see the point they're being made by the High Chancellor is what? At one point, what does he say? He says that the ultimate purpose is to save the people from themselves. So, everything is being done in the name of the people. So, isn't that, instead of the mask of Guy Fawkes and the subversion that it might carry as a part of its long history, don't you think that that is the real dystopia? Even today, present time, don't you think that with politicians trying to save us from ourselves, when the agency has been taken away from the individual, from the citizen, and it is being exercised by someone else in proxy. Don't you think that is the greatest dystopia? And probably, if you're looking for something dystopian in that film, V for Vendetta, that is the thing that is the dystopia. Because you remember, there is one of those shows where the High Chancellor is mimicked by someone else. So they do a little show for which the television journalist is killed. So obviously you
Yeah.
see that the mask is not the operative part, but it lies somewhere else. So your comments in general on all the points that I have made. And
Yeah,
could you
thank
read
you
a
for the
little
question
bit?
again. Yeah, of course. I understand that. I have already taken too much of time. So yeah, I have very little time left. So yes, as you mentioned, that it is true that just relating or kind of equating the mask that V for Vendetta wears, or even Batman wears for that matter, with the mask that we are wearing is a bit oversimplification, which is true, because those were necessity, rather ours is a necessity. And but then I also mentioned that the wearing of mask in case of V for Vendetta was also a necessity, because his entire body was mutilated and therefore he had to wear something, so he wore the Guy Fawkes mask. Yes, it had semiotic purposes, yet it had other complicated and problematic facets to it. But yes, that was also a necessity, like the wearing of our mask is. So you might find the mask with all its agencies and all the complexities to be a bit more intimidating than the simple humble masks that we wear. But the purpose is the same in case of the V for Vendetta, as well as in our case, that we are both forced to wear the mask. Okay, and donning of the PPE kit, which I just equated with the Batman cowl, is also very similar to the basic idea that they were trying to save humanity. Both Batman and the doctors and nurses and all the people in the frontline warriors, they're trying to sustain humanity in as many possible ways as they can. And I think that looking at the mask, or kind of interpreting the mask in this, let's say, simplistic way, kind of gives you more hope, gives us more hope and sustainability in the face of this COVID-19 situation. So that is what I was trying to do. I was trying to get inspiration myself and also spread this message, to kind of if we unconsciously or rather subconsciously try and equate the Guy Fawkes mask to the very mask we wear, I think that gives us a pride. And also the Batman cowl also gives that kind of an agency and that kind of a hope that we might have a better tomorrow in store for us. So that is true. But yes, there are other points which you just made. Thank you for all those mentionings as well. Yes, of course, the mask has a more profounder and more complex significations, and there are lots of other instances which needs to be talked about. Yes, that is also true. But having said all of that, this oversimplification, I think, is very required. And yes, the dystopia that you were mentioning, that we are also facing similar instances. You see, the Northfire Party they were trying to impose homogeneity. There is an instance where a person asks that, okay, why are these people killing us? We are lesbians, and why are they killing us? And the answer to that is that because you are different from the rest of the population. So there is one attempt.
The spare person is waiting to speak to you. The
your
spare
answer
person
has
is
been.
waiting to speak to you.
I
Imran,
think your
please.
answer has. I think your response has been very well understood by the
Okay, I think yeah, that is enough.
Yeah,
that is enough.
thank you very much for your presentation, ma'am. Now
Thank you.
let us move to the third paper presenter of the day, and I request Dr. Samit Kumar Methi, Assistant Professor in the Department of English, Seva Bharati Mahavidyalaya, Jhagaram, West Bengal, and he will be speaking on representations of the post-apocalyptic world, reading Jack London's The Scarlet Plague. So over to Dr. Samit Kumar Methi.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. The title of my paper is Representation of the Post-Apocalyptic World, reading Jack London's The Scarlet Plague in the Contemporary Global Crisis of Pandemic. Diseases, especially infectious, have been very popular themes in literature. As an infectious disease capable of creating a devastating impact on mankind, plague has been a recurring motif in the Western literary tradition. Jack London's The Scarlet Plague, published in 1912, revisits that dominant Western discourse on the theme of representation of plague to comment upon the social, cultural, ethical, and environmental issues in the early 20th century. The novel is one of the earliest attempts for an objective explanation of the nature of dynamics of social, political, and economic factors operating behind a pandemic.
Anna, 7 minutes, let's be.
While focusing on a scientific understanding of the pandemic, the novel explores how the dehumanizing effects of science and technology, wanton destruction of nature, unbridled economic greed, the dominant capitalistic ethos, and the biopolitical issues inevitably led to the catastrophe of mankind and civilization. The Scarlet Plague is a futuristic novel dealing with the cataclysmic effects caused by the sudden outbreak of a terribly infectious and untreatable plague in the city of San Francisco, and offers the dystopian vision of the world with unfamiliar, uncontrollable, and unpredictable future. The story takes place in 2073, 60 years after a deadly infectious disease, the Scarlet Plague, has wiped out almost the entire population of the fictional city of San Francisco. The actual events of the novel took place in 2013, but the novelist anticipates a future when people will live in the forest in the most savage state. In the opening section of the novel, Professor James Howard Smith, a professor of English literature who has luckily survived the plague, is seen to be wandering in the forest with his grandsons, Edwin, Huhu, and Hairlip. Deprived of education, these young children cannot understand the sophisticated language and led a savage life. Granger is the mediator between the two civilizations, the pre-plague and the post-plague civilizations. He uses the sophisticated language while recapitulating the past and speaks in a simple language while speaking with his grandsons. Apart from this uniqueness in the use of language, London suggests that although these people lacked the benefits of modern civilization, the naturalistic life had its many advantages. The gross inequality and discriminations that existed among the people in the past are absent in the life of the forest. This is not surprising given the fact that London was a staunch advocate of the principles of socialism. Hence, he strongly believed in the equal distribution of resources. London is therefore critical of the social order that existed before the Scarlet Plague broke out. I quote, "Our food getters were called freemen. This was a joke. We of the ruling classes owned all the land, all the machines, everything. These food getters were our slaves. We took almost all the food they got and left them a little so that they might eat and work and get us more food." I have quoted from London's The Scarlet Plague, page number 14. The quoted section brings out the crude instances of discrepancy and absurdity in the social patterns of the modern society. As a sophisticated form of apocalyptic narrative, Jack London's The Scarlet Plague offers a cultural critique of rigid class divisions based on economic conditions of the people in the early 20th century. Now, the novel belongs to the genre of post-apocalyptic fiction that narrates the corrupt existing order that brings human civilization on the brink of destruction. The biblical concept of apocalypse is in vogue in the popular culture and in high culture. The possibility of destruction of the world is a conjecture many religious traditions have maintained. Apocalyptic narratives often begin with the premise of irreversible global catastrophe and the near impossibility of physical survival. The novel employs the apocalyptic narrative to predict the future fate for mankind. In a typical apocalyptic narrative, the end of the world is imagined with nobody or only a few surviving. In Scarlet Plague, Granger and a few people are described to survive the devastating plague. The Scarlet Plague spread with astonishing quickness to wipe out the entire population in the major cities of America. People died everywhere, in their beds, at their work, walking along the street, and there were huge conflagrations in the cities. The image presented in the section is that of a chaos and crumbling of civilization. This reminds us of the biblical doomsday, but apocalypse usually tends to be not an absolute wipeout, merely a clearing of the decks in the anticipation of a new beginning. So, Granger's survival is a necessity for the continuation of the mankind in future generations. Interestingly, the phantasmagoric scenario presented in the novel is emblematic of the contemporary scenario with its unprecedented global crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The Scarlet Plague bears a contemporary relevance with the situations of the global pandemic at the present times. A plague As plague was an infectious disease, people made their desperate attempts to isolate themselves from the affected people. Similarly, the terms and phrases like social distancing, physical distancing, isolation, and quarantine have acquired new currency during the pandemic, and this suggests the desperate attempt to restrict the spread of coronavirus. Apart from this, there was seen a mass madness for accumulating food and necessities when lockdown was announced. This situation finds a striking parallel in the novel in which London describes the robbery of a grocery shop. While trying to explain the cause of rapid spread of plague in the major cities of America, London unhesitatingly remarks that it was population density in the big cities which was the key factor for the deaths of huge number of people. He says, long ago, when there were only a few men in the world, there were few diseases. But as men increased and lived closely together in great cities and civilizations, new diseases arose, new kinds of germs entered their bodies. Thus were countless millions and billions of human beings killed. And the more thickly men packed together, the more terrible were the new diseases that came to be. This is equally true for the present COVID-19 pandemic. Although Corona had affected 219 countries and killed till the date more than 25 lakhs of people, the statistics shows that it had affected severely the metropolitan cities like Venice, Paris, Madrid, New York, and almost all the big cities of the world. Comparatively, less affected countries are Africa, Congo, Bhutan, Vietnam, Peru, Uruguay. In India, people living in villages and the communities living in the forest are less affected than the people living in Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Nagpur, etc. Another notable thing is people's initial callousness towards the disease. Granger in the novel recounts, we in California, like everywhere else, were not alarmed. We were sure that the bacteriologists would find a way to overcome this new germ, just as they had overcome other germs in the past. In the early months of the last year, when the news of the outbreak of COVID-19 was making newspaper headlines, people initially denied to accept the seriousness of the virus, as they dismissed it as a usual kind of flu, easily curable.
Dr. Samit, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting in between. Well, I wanted to conclude in 1 minute or so. So yeah, please.
Or at best, they showed their overconfidence for the overnight invention of vaccine by the bacteriologists. This kind of initial indifference to a potentially deadly disease had not only been a key factor for the pandemic in the past, it still remains one of the major causes for the uncontrolled spread of the disease. Man's instinct for survival is best exhibited in the novel where London describes the mass migration from the cities affected by the plague. This may brings to our mind the phrase memories of millions of migratory laborers walking hundreds of miles along the Indian roads after the nationwide lockdown was announced in the month of March last year. Probably each and every individual desperately trying to survive the threat of the virus, the people had overlooked the horrible saga of sufferings and experience of living dystopias of the migratory laborers. Uh, in conclusion, I will say the novel serves as a warning about the vulnerability of our state and civilization. Despite enormous progress of science and technology in the modern age, the fate of mankind remains unpredictable. The novel is an apocalyptic narrative, and an apocalypse usually tends to be not an absolute wipeout, but an anticipation of a new beginning, a rejuvenation. The novel asserts that survival is not simply necessary, but indispensable and inevitable for the perpetuation of mankind. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Samit ji. Well, I think the way San Francisco is shown, it is shown devastated by a sudden disease. It was a sort of alarming call in 1912 by Jack London actually, and the way Corona pandemic hit the world in 2020 and even now, it shows how we need to mend our ways and return towards a nature friendly mode of living, right? So it's like that the plague that hit the world in 2017, as is shown in the novel, it and wiped out everyone, disregarding, I would say, any distinctions of nation, class, gender, or religion, right? And that is there that you that when we talk about this, one of the few survivors, James Howard Smith, right? The way he tells his incredulous and I would say near savage grandsons how the pandemic actually spread in the world and about the reactions of the people to contagion and death, right? Now, see, the thing is that even though it was published more than a century ago, the this plague is actually unique in its power of contemporaneity, right? As it allows modern readers to reflect on the this global fear of pandemics, a fear actually that becomes so alive amidst this coronavirus outbreak of 2019. And what I find I mean about this is that this, contrary to other species of apocalyptic fiction where the enemy can be alien invaders, right, alien invaders, chemical warfare or earthquakes, for example, the enemy in contagion narratives, mostly it is human beings itself, right? The touch and breath of fellow beings, and in course of time the mere existence of other human beings proves out to be fatal. So well, this is something that you I think try to point out, and I just want to ask you that do you think corona acts as a leveler, right? Or for example, death by corona, it acts as a level playing field where all distinctions they come to an end. As for example, if we go back to Thomas Gray and then his elegy, right, where he says all paths of glory, if you substitute that path of glory with all paths of development, lead but to the grave if followed indiscriminately, right? So how do you think from that perspective?
Yes, sir, definitely. Corona has caused a number of problems or disadvantages for us, but it has also many benefits. You know that it has also established equality in many fields, and it has also succeeded in destabilizing the earlier hierarchized social order. So it has its positive outcomes, and in this novel, particularly the novel comes to an end with a note of optimism that that a society will be based on the principles of equality and the class divisions and economic distinctions that existed in the past would be lost once a plague wipes out almost the whole population. So there is a suggestion that a new social order will be established in future, and this kind of discrepancy cannot go forever. Man will definitely create a new social order, and yes, it has also its many positive outcomes.
So thank
Hemraj,
you.
very quickly, I had one, because you made a comment about this man surviving in San Francisco and all that sort of thing. James Smith in the novel, Dr. Maiti.
Yes.
I was just wanting to draw attention to the film I Am Legend with Will Smith. He's this one person who's alive in that spectral city almost. It's a deserted city, and all those creatures have been affected by the disease and they have been dehumanized. So he's the one who is last trying his best to find a cure and also to save civilization. And he has this dog for company. It's a very similar situation, that his own city has become suddenly alien to him. So I just a comment I had to make. Thank you, Hemraj and Dr. Maiti, and we can move Hemraj to the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So thank you very much, Dr. Sati. Now we move to our next presenter, and next presenter is Anirban Guha Thakurta. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. Assistant professor in the Department of English, Serapur College, and she's going to speak on the future containing a pasts and presents, a study of the search for Saraswati River in Sarnath Banerjee's All Quiet in Vikaspuri. So we let us move to now Anirban Guha Thakurta. You can go ahead with your presentation now.
Thank
You have
you.
10 minutes of the time.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Pritam and Ashish sir. Do I have my slides over there? Can those be presented?
Yeah, when you want to show the slide,
Sorry,
just
I need to
inform the
show
back
certain
page that you show the
slides.
slides.
Okay, okay,
When you want to show the slides, just
okay,
inform
okay.
us.
I'll do that. Okay. So I'm dealing with a graphic novel, and Sarnath Banerjee's All Quiet in Vikaspuri, published in the year 2015, is essentially fictional. Is a graphic novel, but becomes, I guess, a graphic history and a graphic satire. Before coming to a full-scale critical engagement with the novel, I want to stress on these two terms that I'm bringing in here: graphic history and graphic satire. I'm indebted to Pramod K. Nair's commentary in his book, The Indian Graphic Novel, and thereby place graphic narrative as a long-form comic book that is a whole narrative rather than a serialized one. And by utilizing the natural, subversive, multimodal language of comics, the same can provide a seamless optic experience that transcends the representational boundaries of alphabetic writing and thereby can guarantee a polyphonic, diversified, and interactive reading experience that naturally combines literary imagination and historical authenticity. But it is because of its multimodality, literariness, probably to the ability to make the reader participate in authoring the tale. A graphic history or a graphic satire can defamiliarize a gradual experience of reading academically written histories and thereby can remain polyphonic, particularly particularly participatory, I would say, and accommodative rather than retaining any authorial meta language. In my presentation, I'm chiefly dealing with the utopian, dystopian, and ecotopian overtones available in All Quiet in Vikaspuri, and how they shape the co-mixing the graphic history and graphic satire in All Quiet in Vikaspuri is the way I'm going to talk. To begin with, comics is bound to get subversive and is mostly, though very falsely and in a very prejudiced manner, is understood as a as a disruptive element, an experience that is to be deemed as underground or at best can be described as subliterary. But when we deal with comics, we must first identify it as a language, perceiving which demands a critical literacy. In fact, a special kind of critical literacy. I, in fact, find the term comics not diminutive, and in fact, view the marginality of comics being understood primarily popular, though unaesthetic, as an advantage. The fact that comics remains marginalized, the fact that it remains a subject of less academically, a subject that is less academically treated, less scrutinized probably academically, and the fact that the term and the art is understood as non-serious allows the author to deal with issues with with uh, with almost an uncompromising sharpness and greater aesthetic freedom. And thus, as the author introduction notes, it is probably because of the freedom that comics as a language provides the author with that allows Sarnath Banerjee to campaign for out of fashion political ideas, outdated celebrities, and out of favor social trends. being a declared literary, imaginative, and speculative fictional employment of the past, present, and future, with the echoes of the utopian, dystopian, and ecotopian, and being non-realistic and non-photographic in its register, the graphic satire of All Quiet in Vikaspuri is naturally subversive, multi-layered, while at the same time it is like the barn owl soundscapers, inspired by history but not limited by it. I would want the first slide over here. Now, to come to the text, the setting is a non-realistic yet imaginatively foretellable or foreseeable Delhi, the Vikaspuri in the future. The fact that it is dystopian is maintained by the plot being placed as the alter ego of the utopia, which is also characterized inside the novel. On the other hand, the dystopian serves as a warning because the imagined future is only a logical progression of the present. As I move deep into the slide, the scene is future Delhi, the Vikaspuri. The visualization is dystopian. It subverts the utopian logic of Vikas, defines it as the polar opposite of what is essentially growth and sustainable development. The gigantic, unresponsive water tap attached to the muted Lilliputish man standing helplessly looking at the helpless, unresponsive tap is a visual signifier of this crisis, a complete subversion of the desired utopia that Vikaspuri aspired or promised to be. And this hollowness of this growth is echoed in the negative space of the full page splash. I want the next slide over here. This water crisis of Delhi, which is not at all fictional. We read about it. We have so many resources. We have the media talking about it all the time. It's not at all fictional, but very much real, historical, and it is bound to unleash a war, or in fact, it has unleashed a war. And that is visualized by graphic elaboration and exaggeration. This is the co-mixing of the graphic satire and the graphic history. As I move to the next slide, as I said, can I have the next slide, please? As I said, the scene is technocentric. It's technocentric future. Future is a movement ahead, like the regular Anglophone reading process in an Anglophone comics. You have normally the Z path of reading. You begin left bottom, move towards right, and then proceed. This is the first page of the novel. See if we can read it. There is that natural Z path reading process from left to right. But then we realize that this progress ahead via this Z path is also pictorially subversive because, as the queue suggests, as the member standing in the queue suggests, there is a movement backward. The narrative of the future is not one of progression, but of regression. Now we need to ask ourselves, can there be a history based on regression? Next slide, please. Now to come back to the context, every crisis or a war needs a hero. Delhi in this novel is a regressive cesspool of water mafias, water corruption, and water-driven warfare. Someone must breathe into it the breath of salvation. This hero, though not noble, is a psychic plumber named Girish, who was once industrial plumber at Bharat Copper Tambapur, a place whose past is the utopia in the novel. Bharat Copper Limited at Tambapur is the ideal PSU, taking care of the employees as well as the environment. until it gets privatized in the name of progress or vikas. The next slide, please. In this very slide, we have this privatization of Tambapur leading to disintegration. And as the image shows, probably the way that we can envision dystopias. And what does lead to? Next slide. And Girish is now among the migrant laborers. And his story echoes not merely his personal past, but there is always that shared history, echoes the unrecorded stories of the historyless citizens of Paradip, Ghatshila, Shingur, and so on. Girish moves to Delhi. Next slide, please. Now, what happens to Girish echoes what happened to the anonymous victims of Tambapur, of the submerged villages because of dam building, or unplanned steps forward, or unplanned urbanization, technocentrism, and obviously, and which in many ways lead to the worst idolatry of progress that is essentially regressive. This is the subverted world of human habitation lying under the dam water. As you find in the image, you can see how that underwater world is actually the past habitat of the people whose houses got submerged. But ironically, how this host of fishes, they replace the birds under the water, and how this devastation is not merely concerning the humans. It's actually a disorder that is characterized by anthropogenic climate change or anthropogenic environmental disorder. Next slide, please. Now, what happens to the poor then, or what really happens to the muted? Are only the underprivileged citizens who are less equal than others, or put behind us to showcase the shining capital of dreams when foreign delegates appear during global meets or tournaments? No, unplanned urbanization, sweeping capitalism, unchecked privatization, and anthropogenic climate change are present, sadly the past, and essentially the future. Living dystopian is the only utopia achievable. Slums are to be covered by the walls, as this illustration shows, and deforestation must be visually or virtually beautified by holding lifeless tree trunks from behind. Next slide, please.
Sir, I think we need to conclude as we are running short of time. We have got time constraints. So please, if you conclude in 1 or 2 minutes, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Now, this is the portrait of Yamuna River, and this novel has this subtext of Saraswati River, and we know all the mythical aspects of it, what appears in the Vedic text, and the popular belief that in the Triveni Sangam, Saraswati, which is flowing underground according to many believers, is meeting Yamuna and Ganga. Now, we all know the holy status of Saraswati River. We also know the holy status of Yamuna or Ganga, for say. And when we think of this dystopian existence, we can understand how rivers are treated. As I move to the last slide, can I have the last slide, please? Yeah. Now, in the novel, Girish must win the battle by ending it. In search of work, he meets Rastogi, and Rastogi funds expeditions into the Earth's core to find out the mythical Saraswati River. Only its water can end this feud, and Girish must dig and find it out. Now, while we have all these echoes of the holy, and that is in fact maintained, echoed by Rastogi himself, with this Mata apostrophe. But living dystopian is anti-romanticizing the holy too. Here the holy unseen river is found out, but the cause behind the funding of the quest for Saraswati is to monopolize water resources. In the dystopian, there is nothing holy after all. The water wars of Delhi is engineered by Rastogi himself to be the city's master, and all the other corruptors like Tankar Rajan or the MCD officials or Delhi Jal Board officials are his pawns. Girish manages to outwit Rastogi and restore the utopia. But the utopian, dystopian, and the ecotopian concerns in the graphic novel enables the text to outgrow conventional history and conventional satire. Its satirical employment of the future is an imaginative employment of historical pasts. We can all identify multiple told, untold, celebrated, uncelebrated, spoken, unspoken, and unspeakable pasts that we read about and come across beyond the pages of academically written histories. All Quiet in Vikas Puri is a mimicry, a partial retelling of the oracular academically written histories. And as Hayden White points out, by de-romanticizing this supposed objective scientific status of history, stating that there is an undeclared imaginative employment of the historical pasts in the histories that we have, which is obviously without the slightest declaration on its part of its being provisional book of knowledge. All Quiet in Vikas Puri, being a graphic history, is a satiric employment of the historical pasts that mimics the objective, scientific, anthropocentric narration, and rather restricted narration of historical pasts. It ironically validates through literary future telling the ancient Indian philosophy of regression. Yeah, I'm just taking another minute. Literary regression. Future telling and the ancient Indian philosophy of regression and alternative modes of recording the past available in Purana, Itihasa, or other Smriti texts, or having a supposedly anti-historical cast, and thereby devalidates claims made by various European scholars about the supposed lack of historical sense in ancient Indian civilization. By inviting and de-romanticizing the Vedic Saraswati River, All Quiet in Vikas Puri poses serious questions at the anthropocentric outlook that hardly recognizes the agency of the non-human. By uniting or conflating the mythical and the historical, heroic histories, unspoken histories of muted men and non-human, All Quiet in Vikas Puri unites graphic satire and graphic history, storing the living conditions of the utopian dystopian concerns. Probably in this way, the novel warns us and probably metaphorically visualizes the point that we continue to see and continue to ignore. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. You captured the worries of the inhabitants of Delhi over the looming water crisis, especially when the notices are being served that, well, due to this VIP locality is not going to get water supply, and then it won't be getting it for the coming 6 days or 7 days, and so on and so forth. So well, what I would say is that going for that Saraswati River, maybe we may not be able to find that, but then what we are left with in the form of the rivers, or whatever rivers we have got with us, we need to save them. For example, for me, any village pond that is there, that needs to be kept clean in the same way as is required for the river Ganges, or as is required for that mythical river as we find in Vedas or so, that river called Saraswati. So Vikas Puri does, as you are looking at it, it does not denote, actually, I would say, any hope in the face of postmodern anxieties, these uncertainties, right? So I would just ask you, do you think that the search for river Saraswati is metaphorically a search for a pristine repose in natural surroundings, right? When nature was used for need and it was not tamed for greed, right? That is one thing. I mean, are the city dwellers far different from the ones whom Michel for whom actually Montaigne calls as noble savages? Now again, that can be quite romantic. But then, yeah, those people, they did not exploit nature as such. So would you like to comment briefly on that, because we are running out of time? Again, that is what I would say.
Yeah, in this very novel, it's a very ironic employment of the Saraswati issue. Saraswati issue is a very political one as well. It doesn't merely serve as a water resource that may actually guarantee a solution. Now, in this very novel, that very political veneer is treated as a subtext. Just one mata would appear, and that would galvanize the affair. But on the other hand, we have to understand that Rastogi, when he brings this suggestion that, okay, we must find out Saraswati, he is always looking at water extraction. He is not really bothered about whether anything else. But more importantly, yes, we need to have nature conservation plans, and obviously all the water bodies must be treated in that way. But probably as the satire in the historical comes in, obviously this subtextual evidence of that satiric on the political inflation available of, but obviously that's not elaborated upon.
Yeah, got you.
In how recent interventions have taken place.
Thank you. I think we have uh, understood what you responded here. I really liked the graphics, actually, the way they make us to look at this situation and then let us believe in sustainable development rather than in blind development, right? So thank you very much. Now let us. Do we have any questions, Pradeepta, or shall we move to the next presenter now?
Himraj, I suggest we move on to the next presenter
Yeah,
because
okay,
we are
okay,
running
okay.
short of time. So let us give time to the next presenter. Okay.
Fine.
Okay.
So
Thank you,
well
Anirban, for
now.
your presentation.
Thank you so much, sir. Now let us move to the final presentation, which will be made by Trina Bose. She's a research scholar at IIT Bhubaneswar. It is a joint paper, as we have got the second author too, Dr. Punya Shri Panda, who is an assistant professor at IIT Bhubaneswar, and Trina Bose, it is she who will be presenting, if I'm not mistaken, and she's speaking on a dystopian climate crisis and human adaptation in Exodus and Not a Drop to Drink. And she's going to actually base a study or make a study on this writer Julie Bertangna's Exodus, and then Mindy McGuinness Not a Drop to Drink. So over to you now, Trina Bose.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Trina Bose, a research scholar of English from IIT Bhubaneswar. Today, I am here to present my paper, as it is rightly mentioned by Bansal sir, that dystopian climate change and human adaptation in Exodus and Not a Drop to Drink. So, in this paper, I have explored the consequences, inescapable consequences of the anthropogenic of the human-induced climate change. So the paper focuses on that the contemporary era of capitalist globalization is also marked by global warming and environmental degradation, as it is mentioned by the eminent critic Dipesh Chakraborty as well. So, since the time of industrialization, back in the late 18th century or in the early 19th century, human beings ceaselessly started exploiting, at the same time polluting nature, degrading and transforming the earth into an uninhabitable place. for all living beings. In the 21st century, as it was there before also, but a new genre of Anglophone fiction emerged or become popularized or popular. So that genre is the genre of climate fiction, or as we generally know is in abbreviated form as cli-fi or sci-fi, science fiction. So the amalgam of the two. So that type, that those fiction become popular, and these fictions generally embark on an ecologically investigative journey into an imaginary or hypothetical world of climate debacle. So this novels, this such type of novels generally portray a post-apocalyptic future with some major changes in global socio-political structures, compliant with limited number of natural resources, and an incessant struggle for human existence. So the two novels that I've selected in this paper for the discussion, those two novels, one is Exodus by Judy Butler, who is a Scottish writer, and the other one is by the American writer Mindy McGinnis, and the novel is Not a Doctor Dream. These two novels portray two contrary yet dire consequences of climate change. One is about the drowning of land due to global warming and consequent sea level rise. As the sea level rise engulf land, so there has been a crisis of land in Exodus, in the novel Exodus, and in the other novel there is utter crisis of drinking water due to a continuous drought. So the novel Exodus, which is set in a near future of climate catastrophe, the protagonist Mara Bell, a young adult, she searches for a new home after the destruction of her old homeland or own homeland that got drowned by the rising sea levels, and she, along with her other islanders, they set out on a perilous journey to find shelter somewhere else. Uh, as she comes to know about the existence of sky cities, as this is also science fiction. So in science fiction, we generally see sky cities constructed in the sky. So those sky cities are not affected by the rising sea levels, and they can save the life of people, if not of everyone, but a large number of people. They can save their lives. So they wanted to have a shelter. Mara and her islanders wanted to have a shelter in this in the sky cities. So the sky city in particular, it's named New Mungo, a city along with her islanders who survived this perilous journey. And Mara lost her family as well, but even in that situation, she wanted to secure a land for herself and also for her islanders during the time of global warming and drowning of land. So Mara and her islanders, when they reach New Mungo, they have been told by the sea police of that city government that there has not been any room for the refugees, and they also ask them to return. Mara and her people, what they do at that time, they join the refugee camp that is outside the impenetrable wall that is built around the cities, sky cities. So this world, as it is metaphoric as well in this novel, that this world, as if this symbolizes the xenophobia of the government of the sky cities or the people of the sky cities. So what they do at that time, they suffer from utter hunger and thirst and illness due to that thirst and hunger. They're fragile. Their situation is. They have illness and disease and all, so they suffer and they wait outside the walls that is there outside the cities, sky cities, and they join the refugee camp outside. As there has been many refugees from rest of the world drowning islands, so they wait there, and instead of providing them with shelter, what the government of the sky cities do, they further exploit the refugees. As the refugees become the victims of exploitation of labor and slavery, as it is generally can be perceived in contemporary times as well, and down the edges these things are happening. So whenever a refugee is coming and illegal immigration and all, as it is generally known in the contemporary time, so thus the new world of the sky cities are characterized by their indifferent selfishness and brutality, which heightens the misery of the flood refugees. So, and on the other hand, the novel Not a Drop to Drink, the protagonist is again a teenager girl named Liu, and she lives with her mother Lauren in a house. In front of his, there has been a pond. And whoever dares to come close to the pond, they used to kill, be it an animal or a human. So the novel depicts a continuous drought in which there has not been any fresh drop of water to drink. As the very title of the novel is self-explanatory. So the poor in this apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic or post-climate change era that is quoted in this novel under discussion, the poor or the ordinary people, they are mostly vulnerable because the rich section or the rich people, they can still purchase bottled water or purified water or desalinated water with their money to quench their thirst. But these people, this poor section and the non-human world, as if they can be equated because they do not have other options. They only either they will have to change themselves or adapt to the changing environment, as they do not have money or other resources. So adaptation is another thing that I wanted to highlight in this paper. The flood refugees, they did not lose hope. They keep on trying to have shelter in somewhere else in the Greenland in the Arctic region, as it is predicted by the scientists as well, that when all ice will melt, Greenland will be free. So that land can be their ultimate shelter, and they hope and they try to reach that land in Exodus by Julie Bartaglan. And in Not a Drop to Drink, what we can see the same thing. That in Exodus, that was the Exodus of the islanders, and in Not a Drop to Drink also, people migrate from rural areas to the urban areas and vice versa. And when there has been a crisis of food resulting from the crisis of water, people are bound to eat grasshoppers and other animals that were not edible at that time also. So, in the time of social incoherence, when the human civilization and the coherent structure have been fallen apart, at that time, the social evils and malpractices that are ever pervasive down the ages, those get heightened in the time of climate change, in the era of climate change. And at that time, to adapt and to eradicate those social evils, people come together. So to conclude, I'd like to say the dystopian vision of a horrific future that is portrayed in the two novels, those can, as it is also mentioned by the former speakers, that can be taken as a warning that this might happen in future if we don't stop exploiting nature and if we keep on doing like this. And the other thing, science and technology, which actually our age, this contemporary age, and say down, I mean, back from the 18th century, characterized our era, science and technology, era of science. They are also very frail. Because they are not able to save everyone. They can save a large number of people, but they can't include everybody. And the acts like fighting, killing, illegal immigration, those acts might seem incorrect or unscrupulous in the context of a normal society, which is driven by norms and regulation and all. But in the future that is projected in this novel, the dystopian future of adverse ecosystem, in this context, these actions are mandatory or necessary for human survival. And the novels, in this novel, despite all hardships, the characters are portrayed as never losing hope or surrendering, as they are not able to come to terms with the changing climate. But all the characters that is showcased in the two novels that are showcased, they are portrayed as trying their level best to adapt to the changing climate, to stay alive, to struggle for existence. So this climate change somehow triggered the instinctive human struggle for existence, and for this reason, it can be said that even though these novels have been set in dystopia, I mean dystopian future, as ideal dystopian writings, these novels are also maintaining utopia in them. So this offers, as these novels offers glimpses of hope. So an ideal utopia in the form of hope is there presented, even out of the horrific portrayals of dystopian future. Thank you so much. That's it. Thank you. So you are not audible.
Sorry for that. This novel that you were talking about, and which is set in I would say a world flooded by melting polar ice caps. It gives a glimpse into what the future could possibly hold amidst all our discussion on climate change, right? Because you find a landscape of fear, you find actually endless sea, and you find cities built high above the waves. And it is what becomes the backdrop for this a teenager here called Mara, right? Who you say she's never willing to give up, even in the most desperate of circumstances, right? And when you look at the other novel that you were talking about, for example, Not a Drop to Drink, right? So it is again about a post-apocalyptic future, right? Just think that what would happen if our water disappeared? Who would know how to act, how to farm, how to be self-dependent, self-reliant, self-suffice, right? So interestingly, the other thing that I was looking for, Not a Drop to Drink, and we are reminded of obviously Ancient Mariner, right? And then Ancient Mariner, if you look there, he had committed the sin of killing the albatross, right? And does the novel show
Not a drop
does
to
the, yeah,
drink.
there, not a drop to drink. Yeah, I do remember those lines actually. Water everywhere, and all the boats did shrink. What I wanted to say here is that does the novel show that humans have committed or are committing some kind of sin in the same sense as Ancient Mariner there had committed? I was just thinking about the
Yes.
title that you were talking about. That and what kind of sin is that? It's not killing a human. It's not by taming or killing an albatross, but by through these other acts of ours which add pollution to the landscape. Would you like to comment briefly on that, because it's a quarter to one now?
Himrat,
I know,
once
sir.
she answers your question, I have a very brief question for her. So, would you like to take the two questions together, or once she answers your question, she can take up my question?
You can ask simultaneously so that we can save some
Okay,
time as
so
well.
okay, with the kind consent of the chairperson, I would just like to ask a question to Trina. Trina, you talk about climate change, disintegrated ecosystems in relation to two texts. Also, climatological calamities that seem to be inescapable. You talk about human adaptation. So do you consider this particular text, Not a Drop to Drink, then to be a survival narrative? And do we need to explore the more ephemeral things below the surface of a survival narrative? There are certain ephemeral things that need to be unearthed below the surface of a survival narrative. So, if you agree this is a survival narrative, then would you like to explore that angle? And since you talk about how utopia is maintained in dystopia, would you also talk about the versatility of the water as a symbol, or the poetic symbolism inherent in Not a Drop to Drink? Because it reminds me so much of the films of Andrei Tarkovsky, like Stalker and Solaris. So, water can be a symbol of purity, fertility. Water can be a symbol of self reflection, journeys, and water flows regardless of out of control. Okay. So,
Yes, ma'am.
these are some things that came to my mind. I thought of asking you. Would you like to comment?
Yes, if we look back at the civilizations in old times, as it is also mentioned by Dr. critic Alok Jha in his water book, that old ancient civilizations, those civilizations built around nearer to water resources. I mean, not far from any water resources. So water is also symbolically signified in various literary texts as symbols of rebirth, symbols of rejuvenation, symbols of death, destruction. So water can symbolically signify death at the same time, but as in Not a Drop to Drink, crisis of water is similar to death, and in as I'm helping this, taking help of this paper. And in Exodus, the excessive salt water that becomes the symbol of death. So water can signify many things, even to contrary things. And yeah, obviously these two novels are the novels of survival. If this would have not been there, these novels would have not been written, because these novels are portraying only the journey that is beginning in the era of post climate change. So climate change has already taken place. What these characters are doing, they are trying to adapt. So if this action of these characters are not there, then these novels would have not been written, I think. Because what to describe if everything is done and over? So for these characters, something is there left, and with that thing only they can lead their rest of the life. I mean, rest of their lives. So whatever is there, they are trying to take that and use that, utilize that, and live their life. So this is these two novels are the novels of survival and adaptation. And the first question is committing sin. So if we take this Anthropocene, this era of Anthropocene and Capitalocene, every human being, the mainstream capitalists, are committing the crime of polluting nature for their benefit and profit-seeking mentality, and to have a pleasure, have a life of pleasure and luxury. We are exploiting nature. Even that is not needed, we are exploiting. So that is the most. I mean, I think that is the most serious crime. So we are being punished with this as nature starts taking revenge in the form of climate change. Natural revenge, revenge of nature, that is manifested in the form of climate change. So that's what I can tell. We are punished for the crime of polluting nature. So even though we are not directly connected with this natural pollution, our forefathers started that, and that is continuing. So that's how. And if we take, for example, the poor sections of the Sundarbans, as it is also, it was also picked up by the last presenter yesterday, that those poor sections, they are suffering that from the consequences of the deed that they have not even committed. They are living in a fragile ecosystem, mangrove region. They are suffering from saltwater intrusion and sea level rise. But the mainstream cosmopolitan people, they are doing the exploitation. They are exploiting nature. But what the sufferers? Sufferers are the mangrove region people. So that's what my answer is, sir. Thank you.
Well, Trina. Thank you for your responses. And with that, we come to the conclusion of this wonderful session that took place today. So I take this opportunity again to thank all the paper presenters. We had Madhu Chandra Roy, we had Rima Chakrabarti, we had Smriti Mehti, we had Anirban Guha, and then finally you, Trina Bose. I think we discussed a range of topics from diverse areas, wherein we did talk about film studies, we did talk about this web series, and yes, we did also move to this part of our country wherein we talked about, that is Saraswati River, and through the analysis of that graphic novel. So all in all, I would say that all the paper presenters, they did contribute immensely to the overarching theme of the conference, and I would say Dr. Pradipta and then Dr. Devashish, they really added glamour to the presentation by let me say, giving a tough time to the paper presenters, and then they opened up various vistas for further discussions. So thank you, Pradipta. Thank you, Devashish, for this wonderful opportunity, for being with you people, and for being in contact with all the present paper presenters here. So that is all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hemraj.
Thank you.
Before I officially thank Hemraj for chairing this session, I would just like to add to what Hemraj has said, that we asked questions with a very positive frame of mind, and we all attend seminars and conferences and we present our research papers for the sake of enriching our research papers. Okay, so even if we asked questions, it was, we wanted to add some angles to your paper so that it helps to enrich your paper. So that was the only motive for asking questions.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And
Yes.
now I would like to thank Professor Hemraj Bansal from Central University of Dharamshala, Himachal Pradesh, a beautiful mountainous region where he comes from. He teaches in the Central University of Himachal Pradesh, Dharamshala. And thank you, Himraj, for sparing your very valuable time in conducting this session and for being with us right from the morning. Okay, so thank you so much for being with us and giving us your time for chairing this session. Now over to Devashish.
All it remains is to thank all the presenters who have been very vibrant, very serious in the work that they have done and the presentations that they have made. Obviously, as Pradipta has already said, questions are there to prop you up, to help you to indicate new directions, perhaps where you can improve your papers and add some layers of thinking to it. Uh, Thank you so much for coming on Inspirare OPT platform and presenting your papers here. Thank you, Hemraj. You distracted me by suggesting that there is rain and snow outside. And seeing you all jacketed up and all that sort of thing. It's a really nice thing. I really appreciate that. So it was a diverting session. It was a wonderfully chaired by you. Thank you on behalf of Inspirare Art to OUCIP. Let's call it a quits. Let's speak somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for organizing this.